Ireland and Great Britain is Zach Gazaway and John Henry.
Hey guys. I'm gonna be praying, and I'm gonna pray in German, and then she's gonna come up and pray in English. Okay? Great. Was hätten uns bitten? Danke Gott, dass wir heute hier sind. Ich danke Ihnen, Vater, dass ihr schwul und ich bin dankbar. Dass ihr mit uns hier seid. Bitte sagt lassen, Sie uns gute Mutter und Ihnen gute Tag. Danke. Im Namen Jesu Christus.
The translation to that prayer is, let us pray. Thank you, God, that we are here today. Thank you for the school, and we are grateful that we get to perform today. Please let us be the good grade for the pastor. Thank you. In Jesus' name.
Please stand for our next action. The South African anthem.
Click, click, click.
Israel.
Okay, English influence on U.S. culture. For 93% of Americans speak English very well, so it's mainly the language of America. The government is sort of based on the idea of innocence until proven guilty, just like Great Britain and America. Military, most of the ranks names come from the English military. And where is it? Buildings such as cathedrals and songs like Yankee Doodle came from England, and they were impacted in American settlements. And food such as tea, sandwiches, pot pies, and trifles came from England and are eaten probably every day in America. The regular greeting in England is handshake and folk dances, and the English country dance aren't really practiced today in America, but they're still practiced in England. And a marriage band, which usually performed in England before the marriage isn't in the U.S. anymore because of information for the parents. So. How I got to Hawaii. The first person to come to America in my family was Nicholas Gazaway, and he came from England, from London to London Town, Maryland in 1650. And, well, my grandparents met in American Samoa when my grandfather was stationed in American Samoa, and and then they lived in Texas, which is where my parents, Alex and Laura, met. And since then we've been moving everywhere, and then we finally came to Hawaii in 2010. So.
This holiday did contribute to the American Santa Claus that we have today. And some other things that Germans celebrate is the Christmas pickle that we celebrate in our house. And it's where on Christmas Eve, my mom and dad will have a pickle in the tree. It's not a real pickle, it's just a glass pickle. It's an orbit. And on Christmas morning, we'll come downstairs and we'll try and find the glass pickle in the tree. And whoever finds it first gets an extra prize or to open the presents first. And that's one of the traditions I enjoy that was in Germany. My grandfather used to live as a sharecropper, which meant that the land that he lived on did not belong to his family. And the owners let them live there if they worked the crops. And my grandpa told me that every morning he would have to wake up at 3 in the morning to milk the cows. And my grandmother, Catherine Walker, who I'm named after, she lived on a farm too, but her father was actually a farmer, so they owned the land. And they had a cotton field. She worked there. And she told me one time that she worked so long that her hands started to bleed, that because the cotton has stuff on it. And on my mom's side, my grandparents, Jim and Donna Dixon. My grandpa is an engineer and also started his own company called Omega. It's alarm systems. And my grandmother, who was a hairdresser and played the organ in her church. My mother, Kent and Shauna Walker, they met at Bob Jones University. Then they moved to Newberry, South Carolina and had me and Andrew. And then after we lived there for 3 years, we moved to Alaska. They had Mateo and Jessica. And some other places we lived are Louisiana, Georgia, and Korea. The reason we moved to Hawaii is because there's a chaplain that is over the Pacific region, and he requested my dad to come work for him in his office, and that's the reason I moved to Hawaii.
Das liegt er Hosen, ja? So, in German culture, there's a celebration called Fashion. This is considered a great party that you do just before Lent, and it lasts over 3 days, and it's a big party where you do whatever you want before you give it up for Lent. This ends just before. This ends on Ash Wednesday. So, how my family came to Hawaii. Well, my mom and my dad met here 20 years ago, and they started dating, and then they got moved different places, and then I'm not sure how, but they met up somehow. They got married and had me. My mom was born in Savannah, Georgia, and my dad was born in Germany. I'm a quarter German. He is half German because my grandma's German, so, and my dad's not. My granddad. And so my mom and my dad, like I said, are in the military. They've been moved all over the country. We even lived in Italy. We lived in Germany for like 6 years of my life. And we recently came from South Carolina before I moved here. And I went with my dad while my mom came here. And I got bored of South Carolina. There's no way to. And so I moved out here. And that's how I came to be living. German culture is also giving us polka, and so I know you guys have heard a lot about polka dance, and so this wouldn't be possible without Miss Stevens. I don't know what she is, okay, and we're gonna perform that, and thank you, Miss Fisher, for letting us borrow the room, so rehearse. So give it up for Miss Fisher. We're gonna perform it for you. Okay.
Okay, before I start explaining my culture and my family, I'm going to lip sing to Danny Boy. History, there have been many Irish immigrants trying to find a new home in a new land. Irish immigrants were arriving as early as pre-Revolutionary War and as late as now. President Andrew Jackson and Ronald Reagan could even trace their roots to the early Irish immigrants. By far the biggest immigration was during the potato famine of Ireland, where obviously potatoes ran out. When many of the immigrants arrived, they had very little money when they arrived because the fare to get here was all they could really muster. So many immigrants were coming from Irish culture to American culture, and they had to adapt. Because of their lack of money, many Irish had to live in cramped or even no living spaces. And many had to find low-end jobs and were paid very low and had a very low income. After a couple generations, the Irish climbed the workforce ladders, and many became political influences in many big cities like New York, Chicago, and many other port cities. Irish Americans majorly affected American culture too. Many Irish were supporters or leaders of Union forces. Many even described the Irish as smooth with words and charm. Many Irish took leading positions in journalism, entertainment, sports, and politics. And even terms such as paddy wagon, Donnybrook, and the Fighting Irish became phrases of American culture. So my family arrived in America during the potato famine and arrived in New York Harbor. Although I don't really know much else more than that because a lot of my Irish relatives have died. Through my bloodline, I can probably trace my heritage back to many cultures such as the Irish, Polish, Russian, Scottish, English, Portuguese, Spanish, and yeah, that's it. So my family itself arrived in 2006 through my dad's job. Before that, we lived in Chicago, Illinois area while my dad was in the Navy after serving for 20 years, though he retired. And then we moved here. So, that's it.
And now I'm going to perform the French ballet. Next slide. Please stand for our national anthem. Some things that the French contributed to America and to the world. Statue of Liberty came from France. You're welcome. Coffee au lait is a half coffee and half milk. It's one of my favorite coffee drinks. Berets, I was going to wear a beret, but I didn't have one. Nationalism, it's not necessarily a good thing. Or the guillotine. But we also did create romance. And just for Pastor Schwab, we also did create the white surrender flags. What our French culture is based on. Right now it's more about fashion, cuisine, and economy. But when French started, when French became a nation, we were mostly artistic and philosophy based. Like painter Claude Monet and Auguste Renoir. The picture on the right upper hand corner is a picture of Claude Monet. And I didn't want to put a picture of Renoir because he did a lot of nudist pictures. And architecture, there's the Palace of Versailles and the Eiffel Tower, which is very known. The performing arts, I would have done the ballet, but I didn't want to embarrass anybody. And the opera is actually Italian/French, but originally it was France, and then it got adopted by the Italians. The philosophy base, there's René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, and then there's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which the book that he wrote, the Du Contrat Social, was the main inspiration for the French Revolution. There's no slides for this, so let's talk about it. My family lineage. My father and I actually traced back our lineage a couple of years ago, and we got back to 1625 when my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Urbain Tessier de Lavigne, was born in France, Anjou, France. And yes, I am actually third cousin of Avril Lavigne. But I'm not really proud of her. Until he was 21, he was a farmer in France, and then the French took over Canada, and they needed recruits to go to France, to Canada, to populate the land. So then he went to Canada and married Marie Archambault, and they had 16 children. 7 girls and 9 boys. And during his stay in Canada, the whole Indian conflict, he was kidnapped by the Iroquois and tortured, and he actually had a finger cut off. And he was actually captive for 18 months. And during his captivity, Marie Archambault had a child, and they named him after Urbain, so there's the Urbain Jr. And to all those settlers that came to Canada from France, they all had part of now, which is Quebec, Montreal. And the church took over that land while Urbain was captive. But they never gave it back when he came back. So now, technically, our family still owns a part of Montreal. So there's still actually lawsuits in Canada about taking the land back. And then Urbain's son, Jean-Baptiste Tessier de la Mine, he pretty much divided the family. We were considered one of the royal families in the 1700s. And Jean-Baptiste had about 5 different wives and 23 children. Disgraced the family, and then that's when our family went downhill. And then, when it went back uphill, is when my grandparents, my grandpa Edward James Tessier, all his older siblings are actually from Paris, but he was from Quebec. And then my grandma Rose, she is from Ireland. And then my Japanese side, because I'm half Japanese. Then my grandpa moved down to Duluth, Minnesota. Go Minnesota. And then that's where my dad's from, and that's where I'm from, and that's where all my family's from.
Wondering why is this little Asian girl up here? But yeah, okay, I'm Russian. Anybody else Russian? Okay. I know all you guys are Filipino, so. Yeah! Filipino, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese. Pretty sure that's it. But, so yeah. Let me get my family history out here. My great-grandpa, Anton Popov, married my great-grandma, who's Chinese, Valentina Chow, and they had 9 children. One of them was my grandma, Olga Popov, and she married this Filipino, Portuguese, Spanish guy named Rodolfo Castaneras, and they had 5 children, one of them being my dad, Carlo Castaneras, and obviously they had me, Carly, and my brother Carl, so Carlo, Carly, and Carl. My mom's name is Matodia, she's Chinese, Filipino. And I guess how I got to Hawaii was, in 1983, my grandpa's sister married an American citizen, so she petitioned for her whole family to get out here. So my grandpa and all of them, they came out here to Hawaii. And then my dad joined the Navy. So in 1993, he met my mom in New York, because my mom was a nurse and my dad was in the Navy. So they met at a party a mutual friend of theirs was holding. 6 months later, they got married. In 1995, I was born here in Hawaii, and then I moved to Orange County for 2 years. Then after Orange County, California, I moved to New York, and I spent most of my childhood in New York, so pretty much grew up there. Then after New York, it was Florida. So then in Florida, I spent like a year there, and then after Florida, I moved here because, well, my dad left, so then we needed help from our in-laws, which is my Russian side, yeah, out here. So now we're here. So I guess what I learned about Russian culture was I could not get anything out of my family. Like, my grandma was totally clueless about Russia. Even though her name's Olga, I mean, come on. But, yeah, like, she was totally clueless, but thank God that I had, last year I met a Russian foreign exchange student from Russia. His name was Igor. I asked him a lot of questions. I was like, he was really, really religious. I think it's Orthodox. Yeah, he told me a lot about Russia. He was like, yeah, it's always really cold there. Of course, I couldn't understand it. It was so Russian. But, yeah, he told me it was so cold there. And he was really religious. Like, he would always be, like, praying or something. And, I mean, he learned a lot from us. So we didn't get a lot of Russian stuff. But he did tell us, like, oh, yeah, in Russia, we had to do a lot of work. He's expected to do a lot of work there, and he was expected to learn a lot when he came here to America, so he had to like stick to his Russian identity, but then he had to learn so much from us. So that's what I learned doing that.
Let's see. African American cultures have brought a lot. Kobe did to the NBA. Who? Michael Jordan was nice, but Kobe Bryant is the president. My family got here in 1885. My mom came here, and then my dad came 4 years later. And they got married later, and at the age of 44, my mom had me, I guess, and yeah, been ever since. How you guys doing? Back in PowerPoint so far. Yeah. You're gonna go back one slide real quick. Okay, does anybody know who that man is? Not Kobe, the other man. One running? Yeah, the one running. That's not that over. That's why we know what it is. Jesse Owens. Oh yeah, that's He's one of the first African American to win one of the Olympics, to win the gold medal. Okay. Well, I'll talk about the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was started in 1955 and it continued to 1968. One of our greatest leaders, I could say, was Martin Luther King Jr. He held in his protesters, his team, they protested, well, boycotted buses, they went on marches to ban discrimination against any color, race, or religion. Back in that time, we couldn't eat in certain restaurants. We had to be, water fountains were separated, restaurants separated, schools, buses. But on certain buses, we had to sit in the back, and if the bus, like, all the Caucasians were coming, we had to get up and stand up the whole ride. When there are other famous who started the bus boycott was Rosa Parks. She was arrested because she didn't want to give up her seat because where she was sitting, it was right. She was in the African American part in the back, and the bus was being full of Caucasians. And one lady, she wanted to sit down, and the bus driver asked her to get up politely, and she decided not to because she was tired, she wanted to relax, she didn't want to have to deal with anything. And so she got arrested several times because she did the same thing over and over. It's like Martin Luther King Jr. And 1964, the Civil Rights Act was approved. It got passed. It banned all discrimination against any color, race, religion, anything like that. And we got our voting rights in 1965. Another famous African American, I say, was in World War II, Doris Miller. I should probably know that is. Doris Miller. Okay, he was an African American. He was a cook on the USS. It's not tough, I can't think of it. It was a Navy in the Army, or Navy cook, and he saved some of the boats that were on the dock. He used a machine gun to destroy some of the Japanese planes, and he was awarded the Navy Cross, one of the highest ranks in the Navy. My family got here because I'm in the Army. Anybody else in the Army out there? Army! Yeah! Army over there! Well, I got here because my dad's in the Army. This is my second time back. I came here in 2001, visited for like 3 years and left. Went back home to Maryland, went to Kansas, went to Germany, I went to Honduras with my dad one time, and my great grandfather, he was African, but he was brought over on a slave ship. He was on a famous boat. I can't remember the name. I think it's a French boat. And so he came here and met my grandmother. Her name is Fanny Lofton. They met and had my my grandmother. Her name is Fanny Lofton too. And then they had my dad in 1997. No, 1976. And then my mom and dad, they met in a department store where they were working for 6 years. They dated for 3 months, and they decided to get married. They had me in August 1996. And then 3 years later, my little brother was born. And after that, it's been a year and life. So, I have a question. Does anybody know who that man is? At the bottom. Okay. Any questions?
What is that picture at the bottom right?
Oh, that's one of the techniques that they use to get African Americans to start marching. They would spray water on them, like 15 gallons of water on them.
What about Malcolm X?
Malcolm X, I'm not going to talk about him.
What is that like jogging back from?
Oh, in that picture, they just beat up an African American because he was marching, and so they used batons to beat him down and drag him back. Any more questions? Oh, you could do that, dude. What was the part? More questions?
Any more questions for anybody else?
Okay, this is one for you. Okay, so since you said how you lived for Germany for 6 years, like, do you speak fluent?
No, I used to know some words, but I don't know anything anymore. That was like when I was 6 that I left. Any more questions? I got one for James. Can you actually speak French? Like anytime?
No.
How does the mustache look?
This mustache is very artistic. Took a long time this morning to make this. But then Carly on the left side, and then Curtis on the right side. Yeah, Matthew.
For EJ, I saw Kobe Bryant wearing a sleeve. Why are you wearing a sleeve?
Just stop.
For the African group, is their language based off of anything?
Can you say that again?
For the African group, what is their language based off of?
It depends on what country, and I know South Africa is Zulu. That's the only one I know. Any more questions?
One thing we've noticed here is that your culture does not have as much contact with their ancestors as, say, the Hawaiian culture. Because the Euros, they came